The Night of the River. The night was quiet, the air was cold, and a thin layer of mist covered the small town like a soft white blanket. Ethan walked along the narrow path that led to the river. He often came here to clear his mind after work. The sound of flowing water always helped him forget the noise of the world. But this night felt different. The silence was too deep, like the world was holding its breath. Then he heard it. A cry. It was faint at first, like the soft sound of a distant wind, but slowly it grew louder. Echoing through the mist, Ethan stopped, his heart beating faster. It sounded like a baby crying. But there was something strange in the tone, something not quite human. Without thinking, he started running toward the sound, his boots splashing through shallow puddles, the cold air stinging his face. The closer he got, the more the cry echoed, bouncing between the trees, filling the night with a haunting melody. He reached the riverbank and froze. A strange blue light shimmered through the mist, dancing on the surface of the dark water. There, floating gently downstream, was a small object shaped like a teardrop, glowing softly as it turned with the current. Inside the transparent shell was a baby, but not like any baby he had ever seen. Its skin shimmered faint silver under the moonlight, and its big eyes glowed softly as if holding starlight inside them. Ethan gasped, unsure whether to believe what he was seeing. The cry came again, but now he could tell it wasn't a cry of pain. It was a call, almost like it was reaching for someone. The water was freezing, but Ethan didn't hesitate. He jumped in, the icy current hitting him like a wall. He swam toward the glowing pod, fighting the strong pull of the river, his breath turning to mist with every exhale. When he reached the pod, he grabbed it with both hands, surprised at how warm it felt, like holding a living heartbeat. He kicked against the current, struggling to bring it to the shore, his muscles aching, but he didn't stop. When he finally dragged himself and the pod onto the muddy riverbank, he collapsed for a moment, breathing hard, his hands still wrapped protectively around the glowing object. Up close, he could see the baby's face clearly. The skin was smooth and almost metallic. Tiny, glowing lines ran across its forehead like constellations shifting slowly. The baby stared at him without fear, as if it knew him, as if it had been waiting. The moment his fingers touched the surface of the pod, a pulse ran through his arm, warm and electric. The pod's light grew brighter for a second, and then dimmed to a soft, steady glow. Somewhere above the clouds, thunder rolled. Even though the sky was perfectly clear, Ethan looked up in confusion, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw something moving high above, like dark shapes against the stars. He carefully opened the top of the pod, and warm air escaped, wrapping around him like a soft blanket. The baby reached out with a tiny silver hand, touching his wet sleeve, and the glowing lines on its skin pulsed gently. Something about the touch made Ethan's fear fade, replaced by a strange calm. He wrapped the baby in his jacket and held it close to keep it warm, its tiny body fitting perfectly in his arms. The forest around him was silent again, but it was not a peaceful silence, it was a heavy one, like eyes were watching from somewhere unseen. Ethan walked back to his small cabin at the edge of the forest. Carrying the baby carefully, as he reached the wooden porch, he heard something faint behind him, a low humming sound, distant but steady. Like engines far up in the night sky, he turned but saw nothing except the mist swirling slowly over the river. Inside the cabin, he lit a small lantern, its warm light filling the room. He placed the baby on a soft blanket near the fire. The baby didn't cry. It just watched him silently with glowing eyes. Ethan felt a strange bond forming, like the child could sense his thoughts, like it understood he meant no harm. He knew this was not normal, this was not human, but he couldn't bring himself to call anyone. Who would believe him? And deep inside, he didn't want to give the baby away. He cleaned the strange pod and placed it near the fireplace, its glow lighting up the walls like moonlight. As the night deepened, the forest outside grew quieter than ever. Even the crickets had stopped. Then, far above, something shifted. 2 streaks of light moved silently through the stars. Not shooting stars, but controlled, deliberate. Somewhere, far away, 2 beings had received a signal, and they were on their way. Ethan, unaware of the cosmic attention he had just drawn, sat beside the baby, listening to the fire crackle. He had no idea that this quiet night by the river was the beginning of something far bigger than he could imagine. The baby that wasn't human. The warm light of the lantern flickered across the wooden walls of Ethan's cabin. The baby lay wrapped in his thick jacket near the fireplace, its tiny chest rising and falling with calm rhythm. Ethan sat in his chair, soaked and exhausted, trying to understand what had just happened. He had found a glowing pod floating in the river. Inside, it was a child that didn't look human. And now that child was lying in his home, staring at him with unblinking, luminous eyes. The silence of the night pressed against the windows, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. Ethan rubbed his hands together for warmth, but his mind was racing like a storm. His instincts told him that this was not just a strange event. It was something far bigger, something he couldn't explain yet. He moved closer to the baby, watching carefully. Its skin shimmered faintly in the firelight, and the glowing lines that traced across its forehead shifted slowly like stars moving in a night sky. It was mesmerizing, unlike anything he had ever seen. The baby didn't cry or fuss, it simply observed him, as if it was studying him in return. Ethan reached out slowly, unsure if it was safe. His hand hovered above the child, and at that moment the baby reached out with a tiny silver hand and touched his fingers. A soft warmth spread through his skin, almost like an invisible current linking the two of them. The glowing lines on the baby's skin pulsed gently in response to his touch, and Ethan felt an unexpected wave of calm wash over him. He whispered to himself that maybe he was dreaming. Maybe he had slipped into the river and hit his head. Maybe this was all in his imagination. But the soft weight of the baby in his arms earlier had been real. The cold of the water had been real, and the pulse he felt when he touched the pod had been real. He couldn't deny what was in front of him. He slowly lifted the baby into his arms again. Its small body radiated a gentle warmth that spread through his chest, like holding a tiny sun wrapped in a blanket. He noticed how the baby's eyes followed his every movement, not like a newborn human's empty gaze, but with awareness, intelligence, and something he couldn't define. He went to the kitchen and warmed some milk in a small pot. Unsure if the baby could even drink it, when he brought the bottle closer, the baby tilted its head slightly and reached toward it. Ethan carefully placed the bottle near its lips, and to his surprise, the baby drank slowly. Its glowing lines brightened with each swallow, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to rise slightly. It was as if the baby was absorbing warmth and giving it back to the room. When it finished, it gave a soft, almost musical sound. Like a sigh made of wind and bells, Ethan's eyes widened. He had never heard such a sound. It was peaceful, yet filled with something deep. Hours passed, but Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat beside the baby, watching it rest near the fire. Outside, the forest remained unnaturally quiet, and from time to time he thought he heard faint humming coming from far above. But every time he stepped outside to check, the sky was empty except for a thick layer of clouds covering the stars. When he returned inside, he noticed something strange. His old clock on the wall was frozen at 2:17. His phone refused to turn on. The lantern light flickered whenever he stepped too close to the pod. It was as if the baby's presence was affecting everything around it. Bending the invisible rules of the cabin, he sat back down, breathing slowly. His eyes locked on the baby's sleeping form. He had always lived alone on the edge of town, away from noise and people, and now suddenly, this child, this alien child, was lying in his home, surrounded by things it clearly didn't belong to, yet it looked peaceful, as if this wooden cabin was the safest place in the universe. Ethan didn't understand it, but he felt a deep pull inside, like something inside him recognized this moment as important, something that would change everything. He whispered softly that he would protect it for now, even if he didn't know what it was. As the night dragged on, strange events began to unfold outside in the forest. Animals gathered near the edge of the clearing, silent and watchful. Deer, foxes, even birds perched quietly on branches, their eyes reflecting the soft glow leaking from the cabin windows. They did not act with fear, but as if drawn by something greater. Inside, Ethan felt a low vibration in the floor, subtle but steady. like the earth itself was humming a distant tune. The baby stirred and looked toward the door with calm curiosity. Ethan followed its gaze, seeing nothing but darkness beyond the window. By the time the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, Ethan's world had changed completely. The baby was no longer just a mysterious creature he had found. It had become something that connected to him in a way he couldn't explain. His devices were dead, the air felt charged, and he knew that keeping the secret would not be easy. People in town would ask questions, and if the government or the military discovered what he had, he doubted they would treat this baby with kindness. He leaned against his chair, exhausted but strangely at peace, unaware that far beyond the sky, two alien figures were moving closer to Earth, their ship gliding through the void, their eyes fixed on a single glowing beacon that had appeared near a small river on a quiet planet. Ethan didn't know it yet, but by saving that baby, he had sent a silent signal into the stars, and that signal had been heard. Whispers in the dark. The following night came faster than Ethan expected. The day had passed in a blur as he tried to act normal, but nothing felt the same anymore. He kept the baby hidden inside his cabin, carefully closing the curtains and avoiding visitors every time he looked at the child. He felt both wonder and fear. It was quiet, calm, and intelligent beyond its age. Its glowing markings shifted slowly like constellations, and whenever he approached, they pulsed softly, responding to his presence. He had tried to turn on his phone again and even checked his old radio, but nothing worked. It was as if all electronic signals were being absorbed by some invisible field around the baby. At first, he thought it was just coincidence. But as the hours passed, he realized the baby's presence was bending the rules of his home. By evening, the forest had returned to its unnatural silence. There was no rustling of leaves, no hooting of owls, no distant calls of night animals. It was as if the woods were holding their breath. Watching, waiting for something, Ethan stepped out to gather firewood. The air was cool but thick, almost charged. Like standing near a storm before it broke, he noticed strange marks in the soft earth near the tree line. Long, elegant prints that didn't match any animal he knew. They glowed faintly under the moonlight as if they were freshly burned into the ground. He crouched down and touched one, and a faint hum vibrated through his fingertips. It felt alive. He straightened slowly, scanning the dark trees around him, but nothing moved. The mist that had appeared the night before returned, curling between the trunks like ghostly fingers. He quickly gathered the wood and returned inside. Locking the door behind him, his heart was beating a little faster now. The baby lay awake on the blanket, its glowing eyes focused on the door as if it already knew what he had seen. Ethan tried to calm himself, telling his mind not to overthink, but deep down he knew something out there was watching. As the night deepened, the temperature in the cabin began to rise and fall in strange waves. One moment the air felt warm like summer, the next it chilled his skin. The lantern flickered constantly, casting long shadows across the walls. Ethan sat near the baby. Holding a flashlight that was already dimming, he listened carefully, and that was when he heard it for the first time. Soft whispers, distant but clear. Carried on the wind, the voices were not human. They spoke in a melodic but unfamiliar language, flowing like a song he had never heard before. His breath caught as he leaned closer to the window. The whispers came from the direction of the forest, rising and falling like a strange chant. His dog, which usually slept peacefully near the door, suddenly stood stiff, ears upright, growling at the darkness outside. But within seconds the growl faded into silence. Like someone had muted the world, Ethan's pulse quickened. He switched off the lantern to listen better, and the entire cabin fell into a heavy darkness illuminated only by the baby's faint glow. The voices became clearer, two distinct tones, one softer, almost sorrowful, and the other deeper, more commanding. They were speaking to each other, not to him, but they were close, much closer than he liked. He grabbed his old hunting rifle from the corner, not because he believed it would help against whatever was out there, but because it gave him a sense of control. His hands trembled slightly. He slowly stepped toward the window and carefully peeked through the narrow gap between the curtain. At first, he saw nothing but fog and dark shapes of trees. But then he noticed a faint shimmer between the branches. Like moonlight reflecting off moving glass, his throat tightened. Two tall figures were moving through the forest slowly, their bodies glowing faintly in rhythm with the whispers. Their movements were graceful, almost floating. Their long cloaks swayed like liquid shadows. They left behind glowing footprints that faded slowly into the earth. Ethan stepped back from the window. His breathing unsteady, he turned toward the baby, who was no longer lying still. The child had lifted its tiny hand toward the door, its glowing lines pulsing faster as if answering an invisible call. Ethan whispered softly to calm it. But the baby didn't look at him. It stared fixedly at the door, completely focused on something outside. The whispers continued, circling the cabin like a soft current. Sometimes they sounded right outside the walls, and other times they seemed to echo from far away. It made Ethan's skin crawl. He decided to check the cameras he had installed months ago around the cabin. They were old, but usually reliable. He connected them to a small monitor, but all he saw was static, no matter how many times he reset it. Every channel showed the same glitchy flicker. Suddenly, one of the screens flashed for a split second, showing a tall, luminous shape standing near the tree line. Then the image vanished again. His heart raced. He slammed the monitor shut, realizing that whatever these beings were, normal technology couldn't see them properly. He sat beside the baby again, clutching the rifle, listening to the haunting melody outside. Minutes turned into hours. The whispers never fully stopped. They rose, they faded, but they remained, like two voices searching, calling through the night. Around 3 a.m, the sound began to retreat slowly, fading back into the forest. The glowing footprints near his cabin door dimmed and disappeared. The mist thinned out, and the night slowly returned to its still silence. Ethan remained awake, unable to close his eyes. The baby eventually fell asleep again, but its markings glowed faintly all night as if it knew the visitors were not gone. Just waiting, when the first light of dawn arrived, Ethan opened the door and stepped outside carefully. The forest looked normal again, but the glowing marks in the soil and the faint lingering hum in the air reminded him that last night had been real. He stared into the trees, wondering who those visitors were, what they wanted, and how long he had before they returned. Deep down, he already knew the answer. The whispers had not been of anger. They had been of longing, searching, and whatever they were searching for was now inside his cabin. Wrapped in a blanket, glowing softly like a star that had fallen to earth, the visitors arrive. The following evening carried with it a strange heaviness, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Ethan tried to keep himself busy, chopping wood and fixing broken tools, but his mind kept drifting back to the whispers from the night before. He couldn't forget those voices circling his cabin like a slow storm. Their language had been beautiful and haunting, and those tall glowing figures moving through the forest had burned themselves into his memory. No matter how much he tried to push the thoughts away, they always returned, like shadows at the edge of his vision. The baby, meanwhile, remained unusually calm. Its glowing lines pulsed in slow waves as if it understood something he did not, and whenever Ethan glanced at it, he saw a look of awareness in its eyes, a quiet understanding that made him both uneasy and strangely protective. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept over the forest, a thick fog began to roll in, heavier than the previous nights. It swallowed the trees and crept over the ground like a living thing. Ethan stood on the porch staring into the white wall forming between the trees. His gut told him that something was approaching, something inevitable. The air grew colder, and the silence returned, that same unnatural quiet that made every sound echo louder than it should. The dog growled low near the door, fur bristling, eyes locked on the woods. Ethan grabbed his lantern and rifle, his hand steady but his heart beat fast. He stepped back inside and closed the door, locking it firmly. His eyes flicked to the baby, lying in the corner wrapped in blankets. Its glowing markings had started to flicker like tiny stars. Responding to something outside, Ethan's mouth went dry. He whispered softly to calm the child, even though he knew it probably understood far more than he did. He turned down the lantern's light to keep the room dim and moved to the window. carefully pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek outside at first. He saw nothing but fog, thick and endless. Then slowly, two tall silhouettes emerged through the mist, moving with the same slow, graceful rhythm he had seen the night before. They were coming straight toward his cabin. Ethan's breath caught. The figures were close now, their glowing outlines becoming clearer with every step. Their long cloaks swayed as if caught in a gentle breeze. Though the night was completely still, when they reached the porch, they stopped. Standing side by side like two sentinels, they didn't knock, they didn't speak, they simply stood there facing the door in perfect silence. Their faint inner light cast strange shadows across the fog, giving them an almost divine presence. Ethan's hands tightened on the rifle, though a part of him already knew that such a weapon would mean nothing against beings like these. Inside the cabin, the baby stirred, its glowing markings flaring brightly as if it recognized them. A soft hum filled the room, not from any device, but from the baby itself. It was like a signal, warm and melodic. Ethan turned toward it in shock. The wooden walls began to creak softly as if reacting to an unseen pressure. The lantern flickered and then steadied. The dog whimpered and hid beneath the table. Ethan took a deep breath and moved toward the door, his heart thundering in his chest. He didn't want to open it, but something inside him knew he had to. With a shaky hand, he unlatched the lock and pulled the door open slowly. Cold fog poured inside like smoke, and the two visitors stepped forward. Stopping just before the doorway, they were tall, elegant, and unlike anything Ethan had ever imagined. Their faces were partly human in shape, but with smooth, luminous skin that glowed softly. Their eyes were like liquid starlight, deep and endless. They wore long robes that shimmered faintly like flowing water. They spoke to each other in that same melodic language, their voices blending like a quiet chorus. Then they turned their gaze to Ethan, not with hostility, but with intensity. As if they were looking through him, Ethan stood frozen. Clutching the rifle without raising it, the visitors raised their hands slowly, showing empty palms, a universal gesture of peace. One of them then pointed toward the baby inside, their movements deliberate and graceful. They stepped slightly closer, but not in a threatening way. Their presence filled the cabin entrance like soft light filling a dark room. Ethan glanced back at the baby, who was now sitting up, its tiny hands reaching out toward the visitors. Its glowing patterns flashing rapidly. Ethan turned to them again, confused but instinctively feeling that this moment carried weight far beyond his understanding. The taller of the two visitors reached inside their robe and pulled out a small crystal device that floated above their hand. It projected holographic images into the air, glowing shapes and moving figures that filled the space between them. Ethan's eyes widened as he watched images unfold like a story without words. He saw a world of silver forests and glowing skies, then saw destruction, fire, and chaos. He saw a ship carrying the baby through a dark tunnel of stars. And finally he saw Earth, the river, and a bright beacon pulsing from his cabin. The visitors pointed at the baby, and then to their hearts, their eyes soft but urgent. Ethan realized they weren't here to harm. They were here for the child. For a long moment, none of them moved. The fog wrapped the cabin like a cocoon. Inside stood a human who had made a choice to save a child, and outside stood two alien visitors searching for that same child. The air was thick with quiet emotion. Not anger, but desperation and hope. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, understanding that violence had no place here. He took a careful step back and allowed the visitors to enter. Their glowing presence illuminated the room fully. The baby made a soft musical sound that filled the air with warmth, and the two visitors knelt gently beside it, their hands hovering over the child's head as if in reverence. Ethan watched silently, his heart filled with both fear and wonder. He didn't understand their words, but he understood their eyes. This baby was not just special, it was precious. It was their hope, and somehow he had become part of their story. As the fog swirled outside and the night deepened, Ethan realized his quiet life by the river had ended. He had stepped into something far bigger, and the visitor's arrival was only the beginning. A choice between worlds. The atmosphere inside the cabin was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The two alien visitors knelt beside the glowing baby with a reverence that felt almost sacred. The soft light from their bodies filled the wooden room, pushing back every shadow and making the walls seem alive with shimmering reflections. Ethan stood silently near the doorway, his rifle now forgotten against the wall, watching as they communicated with the child in their melodic, flowing language. Their gestures were graceful and deliberate. Their eyes carried an intensity that told him this was not a casual reunion. This was something far greater, something that reached across worlds. The taller visitor held out the crystal device again, and a new series of images appeared in the air. This time they were clearer, almost like living memories projected between them. Ethan saw a beautiful alien world filled with silver forests, glowing rivers, and vast skies where light moved like living threads. Then the images shifted, showing a terrible catastrophe. Explosions ripped through shining cities. Massive ships escaped into space as their world burned behind them. He saw desperate faces, families holding each other, and then a single vessel breaking away. Carrying something precious inside, the image zoomed in, and Ethan saw the same baby lying inside the pod, peacefully sleeping as stars rushed past outside the window. Then the image showed Earth, his river, his cabin, and finally him. Holding the child in his arms for the first time, Ethan's chest tightened as he understood the story they were telling. The baby was not a random visitor. It was a survivor, perhaps the last of something great, sent across the stars to a quiet corner of the galaxy. And somehow it had ended up in his hands. The visitors pointed at the baby and then at their hearts again, their glowing eyes reflecting sorrow and hope. Ethan didn't need words to understand their message. They were here to take the child home, or at least to safety, far away from this small cabin by the river. But there was another side to this story. Outside the cabin, beyond the fog, the world had already noticed something. For 2 nights now, strange lights had been seen over the forest. Whispers had spread through the town, and the military had picked up unidentified signals in the sky. Somewhere not far away, men in uniforms were staring at radar screens, analyzing energy spikes that didn't match anything Earth had recorded before. A signal from the baby's pod had been traced, and vehicles were already moving through the night, their headlights off, their engines quiet, like wolves circling a prey they didn't yet understand. Inside the cabin, the taller visitor moved closer to Ethan. Their presence was calm but powerful. They placed a hand on their chest and then gestured toward the door, then pointed toward the sky. Their message was clear. They wanted to leave before others arrived. They needed his help to protect the child and make that escape possible. Ethan glanced at the baby, who was now looking between him and the visitors, its glowing lines pulsing faster as if sensing the weight of the decision. He took a slow breath, his mind racing. This was not just about curiosity anymore. This was about trust. He thought about calling the authorities, handing the baby over, letting professionals handle this. But deep inside, he knew what would happen. He had seen how people reacted to what they didn't understand. Fear came first, and then control. He imagined labs, cages, endless questions, and the light fading from the child's gentle eyes. He shook his head. That future was something he couldn't allow. No matter how overwhelming this all felt, he looked at the visitors again, their eyes soft and patient, waiting for his answer. Ethan walked toward the baby and knelt beside it. Placing his hand on the soft blanket, the child reached out with its tiny hand, touching his fingers just like the first night by the river. The same warm pulse ran through his skin, steady and alive in that moment. Something inside him settled. The fear didn't vanish, but it found a place next to something stronger, a sense of purpose. This child had fallen into his life for a reason, and whether he understood that reason or not, he couldn't turn away. He looked up at the visitors and nodded slowly, a silent promise forming between them. The visitors exchanged a quick glance and then activated the crystal device again, this time showing a different set of images. A nearby clearing in the forest lit by a circle of strange symbols, and above it, a massive craft hidden behind a layer of clouds. Ethan understood that was their way out. and they needed to get there before anyone else could intervene. The taller visitor extended a hand toward him, not as a demand, but as a gesture of alliance. Ethan hesitated only for a moment before gripping it firmly, feeling a gentle warmth spread through his arm. Sealing their silent agreement, outside, distant sounds began to break the night's stillness. The faint rumble of engines, the snap of branches under heavy tires, the whir of drones slicing through the air. Ethan froze for a moment. Realizing that their time was running out, the visitors turned toward the door, their eyes narrowing as if they too sensed the incoming threat. The baby let out a soft sound, like a bell echoing through the air, and the fog outside thickened suddenly, swirling faster, almost like it was alive and responding to the child's fear. Ethan grabbed his jacket and a small backpack, stuffing inside what little he thought they might need. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, more out of instinct than belief in its use. The visitors wrapped their glowing cloaks tighter and moved toward the door with silent grace. Ethan followed, holding the baby close against his chest, the warmth of its tiny body seeping into him like a quiet promise. When they stepped outside, the fog swallowed them completely, the world around them shrinking to a few feet of glowing mist. Above, faint beams of light moved across the sky, scanning, searching, and the distant hum of helicopters began to grow louder. Ethan didn't know where this path would lead, or if he was ready for what was coming, but the choice had been made. And once made, there was no turning back. He tightened his grip on the baby and followed the visitors into the darkness of the forest, unaware that with this single decision, his life had just crossed the line between the known and the infinite, between Earth and the stars, between ordinary and destiny, the pursuit. The forest was drowned in fog so thick that even the moonlight struggled to break through. Ethan followed the two alien visitors closely, clutching the baby against his chest as they moved deeper into the trees. The ground was damp beneath his boots, and every branch that cracked beneath his feet sounded louder than thunder in the quiet night. The visitors moved like shadows, silent and sure, their glowing cloaks blending with the mist until they looked like spirits guiding him through another world. Ethan's heart raced, not only from fear, but from the sharp awareness that they were no longer alone. In the distance, he could hear the soft, mechanical hum of drones and the faint rumble of heavy vehicles drawing closer. The hunt had begun. Behind them, dark shapes moved through the fog. Vehicles with their headlights off crawled across the dirt roads like predators stalking prey. Drones zipped through the air, their scanning lights cutting through the mist in narrow beams, searching, calculating, locking on to faint signals somewhere far above. Helicopters began to circle, their blades slicing through the cold night air, sending low vibrations through the forest floor. Ethan glanced at the baby, its glowing markings now pulsing rapidly like a heartbeat. The child was sensing the danger too, and the fog responded to its fear, swirling thicker around them as if trying to hide them from prying eyes. The visitors led Ethan to a narrow, hidden path that wound through the oldest part of the forest, where the trees grew tall and close, their branches forming a dark ceiling overhead. The air was colder here, and a strange silence filled the space. Broken only by their quick footsteps, Ethan stumbled a few times on twisted roots but never let go of the baby. The visitors would occasionally glance back, their glowing eyes sharp and alert, silently communicating with each other in their melodic language. They moved like they had walked this path 100 times before, as if the forest itself remembered their presence. Suddenly, a bright light swept across the treetops. Cutting through the fog like a blade, Ethan ducked instinctively. Pressing his back against a tree trunk, one of the visitors raised a hand and the fog thickened immediately. Forming a wall that swallowed the light completely, the beam moved back and forth, confused, and then shifted away, searching elsewhere. Ethan realized then that the fog wasn't natural at all. It was reacting to the baby, protecting them like an invisible ally. The visitors understood how to use it, guiding them through blind spots and avoiding the machines above. But the humans chasing them were relentless. In the distance, loudspeakers echoed through the night, deep, authoritative voices ordering someone to stop. Though they clearly didn't know exactly where their targets were, Flares shot into the air, lighting up parts of the forest with an orange glow. Soldiers in tactical gear moved in tight formations, scanning the area with night vision and thermal equipment, but each time they neared, the fog would thicken just enough to scatter their sensors, creating confusion and delay. Still, it was only a matter of time before they would get close enough to see clearly. The visitors quickened their pace, and Ethan did his best to keep up, his breath coming out in short white clouds. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. If they were caught, he knew the baby would be taken away, and whatever fate awaited it would be beyond his control. The thought gave him strength, pushing him forward despite the growing fatigue. The path opened into a small clearing surrounded by ancient stone ruins, overgrown with vines and moss. In the center of the clearing, glowing symbols were etched into the ground, the same ones he had seen earlier in the crystal projection. This was the location, their escape point. The taller visitors stepped into the center of the symbols and activated a device from their robe. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground. The glowing lines on the forest floor came alive, spreading outward like veins of light, reaching up toward the sky. Ethan shielded his eyes as a massive circular craft slowly revealed itself above the clouds, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. Silent and immense, it had been hiding above them all along. Cloaked until the signal called it down, beams of soft blue light extended from its underside, piercing through the fog like divine pillars. But their moment of escape was interrupted by the sharp crack of branches. Soldiers had finally found the edge of the clearing. Dark figures emerged through the fog, their laser sights flickering like tiny red eyes. The order to stop echoed through the night again. Louder and closer, Ethan's heart pounded. He held the baby tighter and moved closer to the visitors. One of the aliens raised their hands, creating a shimmering barrier of light around the clearing. Bullets were fired almost immediately, but they slowed and melted away against the glowing shield like snow hitting a flame. The soldiers advanced cautiously, surrounding them from multiple sides. Above, the ship lowered slightly, its engines humming softly but powerfully, creating a low vibration that shook the leaves. The visitors gestured urgently to Ethan, signaling that it was time to go, but the soldiers were now fully in position. More drones descended, their lights swirling through the fog like mechanical fireflies. Helicopters dropped flares that turned the night into a shifting battlefield of shadow and light. One of the drones fired a pulsing beam toward the barrier, causing it to ripple like water struck by a stone. The visitors responded immediately, their hands moving in fluid motions to strengthen the shield, their glowing forms brightening with the effort. Ethan looked around desperately, realizing the danger they were in. He saw fear in the soldiers' movements, too. They didn't understand what they were facing, and fear made them unpredictable. He turned toward the baby, whose eyes were wide open now, its glowing markings blazing like a constellation in full bloom. The ground trembled slightly, the fog swirled violently, and suddenly every drone's light flickered and died, one by one, their mechanical hum falling silent. The helicopters above swerved unsteadily as their instruments went haywire. Soldiers shouted in confusion as their radios filled with static. The baby wasn't just reacting to the danger, it was fighting back. The taller visitor extended a hand toward Ethan, their glowing eyes filled with urgency. He stepped forward without hesitation, holding the baby close as the alien grasped his wrist. The beam of light from the ship intensified, surrounding them in a bright column that reached into the heavens. The soldiers rushed forward, but they were too late. Their boots splashed through the illuminated symbols on the ground as the beam lifted Ethan, the visitors, and the baby slowly upward. The barrier shattered behind them like glass. Soldiers fired blindly, but their bullets dissolved in the rising light. As the world below grew smaller and the forest disappeared beneath a thick veil of fog, Ethan's heart pounded with fear and awe. He had never imagined he would leave the ground like this, carried into the sky by beings from another world. Helicopters circled helplessly as the massive craft's surface shifted and sealed itself shut, hiding its passengers from human eyes. Below, the soldiers stared upward, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The forest, once silent, now held echoes of chaos and light. Ethan didn't know what awaited him above, But as he held the baby close and looked at the glowing visitors beside him, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. There was no turning back now. A new dawn, as the beam carried them higher into the night sky. Ethan felt the cold wind against his face fade away, replaced by a strange, calm warmth that wrapped around him like invisible hands. Below, the forest disappeared beneath the swirling fog, and the flashing lights of helicopters grew distant and powerless. The massive circular craft loomed above like a silent moon, its surface glimmering with shifting patterns of light that seemed alive. When they passed through its underside, it felt like moving through a veil of water, and suddenly the noise from below vanished completely, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through his bones. The beam faded, and his feet gently touched a smooth metallic floor that reflected the soft light like liquid glass. Ethan stood in awe, clutching the baby close. The interior of the craft stretched out around him like a cathedral of light and metal. Walls curved seamlessly, glowing veins of energy ran across every surface, and the air itself felt cleaner and easier to breathe. The two visitors stood beside him, their cloaks now shimmering brighter inside their own environment. They exchanged quick melodic words, and several other figures emerged from deeper within the ship. They were similar in appearance, tall and luminous, but their expressions were filled with relief and wonder when they saw the child in Ethan's arms. It became clear to him that this was not just a rescue mission. This was a reunion. They formed a gentle semicircle around the baby, lowering their heads slightly as if honoring something precious. Soft harmonic sounds filled the space like music. The baby responded by raising its tiny hands, and its glowing patterns flared like a small star. Ethan could feel the warmth intensify. A gentle pulse moved through the floor beneath his boots, and the walls themselves seemed to glow brighter. It was as if the entire ship was reacting to the baby's presence. Welcoming it home, the visitors turned to Ethan, their eyes reflecting gratitude and something more, a deep respect that he didn't fully understand but could feel in his heart. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a crystal device larger than the one he had seen before. It projected a vast holographic map into the air, showing stars, constellations, and a bright line stretching across space, connecting their world to Earth. Images followed, showing what had happened to their planet in greater detail. Their civilization had faced destruction, not by war with humans but by a force that tore through their skies like a storm, scattering survivors across distant systems. The baby was not just any child. It was a symbol, perhaps even a future leader, sent away as a last hope for their kind. Ethan stood silently, feeling the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders. He thought back to the quiet night by the river, the way he had found the glowing pod drifting through the mist. At that time, it had seemed like a strange accident, a mysterious event dropped into his simple life. Now he realized it had been part of something much bigger. His actions that night had set into motion a chain of events that no one on Earth could have imagined. He had chosen to act not out of knowledge or strategy but out of basic human instinct, the instinct to protect a helpless life, and that single act had changed everything. As he stood on the alien craft, watching stars spread before him through a transparent section of the wall, Ethan felt both small and infinite at the same time. Earth hung far below like a glowing marble wrapped in clouds, fragile yet beautiful. He thought of the soldiers who had watched helplessly as the beam carried him away, of the town where whispers would soon grow into rumors and then into legends. He imagined people searching for explanations, governments scrambling for answers, but he also knew that no matter what they tried, they would never truly understand what had happened in these woods. Not yet. The taller visitor approached Ethan slowly and extended their hand toward the baby, their expression gentle and grateful. Ethan hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange pull in his chest. He had only known the child for a short time, but the bond between them felt deep, as if some invisible thread connected their souls. The baby turned its glowing eyes toward him, and for a brief moment the entire room fell silent. Ethan felt a warmth inside his mind, like a quiet voice that didn't speak in words but in feeling. It was a goodbye, not of sadness but of trust. He nodded slowly and handed the baby over, his hands trembling slightly as he let go. The visitors held the child with care and stepped toward the center of the room, where a column of light rose from the floor to the ceiling. It surrounded them gently, lifting the baby a few feet into the air. Holographic symbols floated around like constellations, and soft music filled the ship again. Ethan watched in silence, feeling both proud and strangely empty. He knew this was the right choice, but that didn't make it easy. He had been a simple man living by a river, and now he stood among stars. Having become part of another world's story, the taller visitor returned to him and placed a glowing crystal in his palm. Closing his fingers around it gently, a surge of warmth passed through his body, and he saw brief flashes of images in his mind. Stars, worlds, and a path connecting him to this moment. It was a gift, a bond, a way of remembering. They looked into his eyes, and though no words were spoken, he understood. He would always be part of their journey now, and their story would forever be part of his. The ship began to rise slowly, drifting higher above the Earth's atmosphere. Ethan looked out through the transparent wall one last time, watching the world he had always known grow smaller. He felt no fear, only a strange sense of clarity. Humanity had always believed itself to be alone, fragile. But here he was, proof that the universe was far bigger and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could bridge entire civilizations. As the stars grew brighter and the Earth faded into the distance, Ethan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He didn't know where this journey would lead or whether he would ever return, but he understood one truth clearly now. This was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new dawn,